Welcome to the Resilient Recruiter Podcast. This is your host, Mark Whitby. I'm joined today by Chikere Igbokwe. Chikere is an experienced executive recruiter, facilitator, and she's also the founder of Inclusive, a DEI consultancy helping organizations build inclusion into their foundations. Chikere is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's on a mission to make organizations more diverse and inclusive, and to equip them with the know-how to be changemakers. Chikere, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Brilliant, Mark. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for using your platform to amplify my voice.
Well, my pleasure. And I want to learn from you today. This is a topic which is important, but I feel like I don't know enough about. And so I want to learn from you. And I'm hoping that if I ask you the questions that I need to learn, then the audience will learn as well. So before we dive in, I just wanted to mention we both worked at TMP Worldwide in 2001.
Yes.
Although we didn't know each other at the time, coincidentally, we were both senior consultants. You were in London in the HR practice. I was in the sales and marketing division in Edinburgh. What a small world recruiting industry is.
I know, Mark. And it's so funny because when I normally tell my story, I normally say to people that I sort of like fell into recruitment, as we do. Isn't it funny that recruitment's not really a profession that many people, I guess, set out to do? We all fell into it, but it's something that I really loved and have always been really passionate about recruitment.
Fantastic. And well, me too. And I wondered, what led you from being a recruitment consultant to the work you're doing today? Maybe some context would help. Would you share a bit about your story?
Yeah, definitely. And this is what I love to do. I love to tell my story because I think it is really important for people to know who I am. So here it goes. This is my story. So I was born in Southampton, in Hampshire, to a Caribbean mother and a Nigerian father. My maternal grandmother came over from the Caribbean. She was part of the Windrush generation, and she was a nurse, and she worked in the NHS. So she was invited over by the British government. And obviously my mother came over with her. And my father, as I said, is Nigerian, and he came over to study. He was a mechanical engineer and was because he is retired. So he went to study at the University of Surrey, met my mother in Southampton, and the rest is history. I was born, okay? And for me, being of Nigerian, Caribbean descent, British born, is really important and it's part of my identity. And I guess we will talk about that a bit later on. But I came to London to go to university and loved how big and diverse and amazing London is. And I fell into recruitment and really loved recruitment. So when I did start to recruit for very, very senior HR professionals in a number of different sectors, one thing about HR was, and I'm sure you will agree with me, is HR is full of women, full of amazing women, okay? And I remember when I used to go on client visits to visit, chief people officers and HR directors, a lot of the time, those people I would go and visit were men. And I always wondered why, because it's HR is full of amazing women. And Mark, funnily enough, I would very rarely see people who looked like me, okay? So people of color in positions of power and influence. So for me, it was really important that as a recruiter, I knew that my role was quite a powerful role, okay? My role was, as a recruiter, I could really diversify an organization. So I was on a mission to ensure that my shortlist and talent pools were diverse. They were full of everybody, okay? And even now, it's so funny. I was looking at my my groups. I've got a number of groups that I set up many years ago on LinkedIn, and these were diversity groups. So I have always been an advocate for all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think for a lot of people, last year, in the midst of this awful pandemic that is still ongoing, was a year that a lot of people woke up It was as if we woke up. So think of it, Mark, sitting at home. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm scared because I was binge listening to the news. There was a time I was listening to news every hour. And I remember my husband saying to me, Chikere, that's enough. Stop binge listening to the news. Mark, I felt scared. Okay. And then we had the awful murder of George Floyd. And I had a lot of my clients and candidates and connections saying, this is terrible, Chikere. What should we do? And I remember feeling really down about everything, thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And then all of a sudden I thought, no, I'm going to use my platform to create change. And that was when Allyship was born. So Allyship is a community for allies to come together. And the key thing with the Allyship community is that it is a safe community and a brave community. It really is important that we all come together, Mark, because what I say to people is this fight this fight we're on, this is not black versus white. This is everybody coming together to solve a big issue. And I think we've seen that most recently with the Marcus Rashford mural in Manchester that was defaced. Look how the community came together, okay? So I guess my whole diversity journey sort of like grew really from me being that recruiter wanting to make a difference to 2020 and now just really trying to ensure that, I use my platform to create change. And then off the back of the Allyship community, Inclusive was born. And Inclusive really is a DEI consultancy. For me, what is really important is the whole thing about awareness, education, and action. It really is important that we speak about these things, because I really feel, Mark, that pre-2020, pre-George Floyd's murder, when we spoke about diversity, equity, and inclusion, rightly so, we spoke about gender, rightly so, we spoke about sexual orientation, but I think that race was something that we never spoke about. And even now, when I do my allyship sessions or my anti-racism sessions, I always find that people are still very, very uncomfortable talking about race. And people are very uneducated as well. So for me, I'm on a mission to educate, really. I think that's what is really, really important.
Amazing. I love that. Great. Thank you for that story. Beautiful. So the Allyship community came first before the inclusive consultancy. So tell me about the Allyship community. Who is that for? And what is that? Can you talk more about what that is about?
Yeah, definitely. The allyship community is for everybody, okay? And I think this is really important.
But sorry to interrupt. When you say everybody, like, is it for professionals? Is it for companies? Who is the target audience for that? Is it in a business context or?
Yeah, so funnily enough, the allyship community is full of professionals. It's full of people. So it's not really, I don't really have companies. It's more individual people who want to learn more, who want to discuss in a safe and brave space. So it's full of individuals. And at the moment, I think we're about nearly 1,000 strong.
Wow.
Okay, exactly. And part of the allyship community, I have the Allyship book club, because Mark, education is important on this journey. We need to ensure that we are continually self-educating. So the bookshop was born off the back of the allyship community. And what I noticed was the hunger that people had for learning. It's a safe community. People tend to ask an awful lot of questions, okay? And I just felt, something, we need to read more. So I set up the book club. So we meet on a monthly basis. We read a different book and a different theme each month. As you can imagine, it's Black History Month at the moment. So we are reading a book by a female African author. But each month we have a different theme, and then we meet. It's normally the first Monday of each month at 7 p.m. to 8:30. We sometimes have a speaker, but we discuss the book, we discuss the themes in a safe space. Okay.
Love it.
And as I said to you, Mark, that whole talking about race or talking about sexual orientation, they're the big topics that people want to talk about. And that's what I found.
So, I love it. So, first of all, the book club is a cool idea. In our coaching group, we also have a book club because I think, leaders are readers, and most of the people who I seem to attract also love reading and learning. So, that's a cool idea. Um, I'm going to ask some pretty basic questions, Chikere, if that's okay.
Definitely.
And so, first of all, what do you mean by a safe space? What does that really mean in terms of your allyship community?
Yeah. So obviously, respect is really important, but it's a safe space to come together and have a discussion, a difficult discussion. The last discussion we had was about white privilege
Yeah.
and what white privilege means. And as you can imagine, I had someone say to me that he didn't like the term white privilege. Okay. He told me it was racist towards white people. So I really want people to feel comfortable enough to have these conversations, because we have to have these conversations in order to understand terminology, understand the terms, and really make a difference. And I guess for me, after having a conversation with him about white privilege and the meaning of white privilege, he walked away much more confident and comfortable with the term.
Hmm.
So when I say a safe space, it's a safe space to ask questions, okay, and have a discussion. But Mark, I also want the allyship community to be a brave space as well, because as you can imagine, there are people of colour, there are people from the LGBTQ plus community who want to share their experiences. So I want them to feel brave enough to share those experiences as well. So it's a safe space for allies to ask questions, no matter how silly it is. And it's a brave space, okay, to share, previous and past experiences as well.
Excellent. I like that because I feel like part of the inhibition that people feel about this conversation it's a charged conversation, and it evokes strong feeling, and people
Hmm.
are maybe cautious of saying the wrong thing or
Yes.
being perceived in a negative light, or not knowing what the best way to even talk about this is. So
Mm.
they maybe are intimidated. So it sounds like you are overcoming
Mm.
that with your group. What does, again, this, for maybe some people this is a dumb question, but what do you mean by allyship?
Mm. Allyship means an awful lot of things, okay? And I think for me, allyship hasn't just got one definition, okay? Allyship is immersing yourself in content from groups that are not your own. Allyship is learning, unlearning, relearning. Allyship is self-education. Allyship is listening. Allyship is having a discussion. And you know something, Mark? Allyship is also not being afraid to make a mistake, because we're humans. And of course, we're going to make a mistake. Of course, we're going to say something, okay? But it really is important that I really want people to understand that you will make a mistake, you will say something, okay? But hey, own up to it. Apologize, okay? And what I also say to people is that allyship is a journey. And I know this is going to sound really morbid, but allyship is a journey that never, ever ends, because it's not the case that you will pick up a few books and read a few books, have a few discussions, and then, da, I'm a fully fledged ally. No. As an ally, you're constantly learning, relearning, unlearning. So that whole self-education is key.
Mm.
And you know something? Sometimes when I do these sessions, people also put their own meanings of allyship as well. So allyship is an awful lot of things. So what I say to people is that, in order to be a better ally, it really is important, that whole self-education piece, because the more we educate ourselves, Mark, the more we educate ourselves, the
Mm.
more we will be equipped to have these difficult discussions.
Awesome. All right, that makes sense. So,
Mhm.
so then, why did you decide to actually turn this into a business?
Mm. Well, what happened was with that, after the allyship community, I just had an awful lot of organizations just saying, Chikere, will you come and do a webinar, or will you come and do a workshop? And for me, getting that message out there is really, really important. And then I thought that I could really make a difference. I can really use my platform to make a difference. And doing something that I'm passionate about and that I love, okay, and I can really make a difference from, and I can also get paid for it as well. I thought, you know something, let me do that. And the thing about it, Mark, I'm a black woman and I've got two amazing black teenage sons, okay? And I think for me, I really wanted to ensure that I was using my platform to create change, okay? What I have found is that the younger generation, Generation Z, they get it. Regardless of their color, they just get it. They're
Yeah, for
phenomenal.
sure.
I see it in my son's friends, who are black and white, Asian. They get it, okay? It's the older ones that are finding this journey really, really difficult. So do you know something, Mark? Using my platform to create change for me, I'm on a mission. This means so much to me. Okay. And I know, Mark, I won't be able to make change in my lifetime, but hopefully, even if I can educate one person a week, if I can make a difference to that one person a week, then surely, change will definitely happen at some point.
Amazing. What you said about your teenage sons, I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and boy, am I learning a lot from her. Like, it just blows my mind the way she just thinks
No,
completely differently to
so
me. And
differently.
we have some
Yeah.
very interesting dinner time conversations. But the problem is, she does not have. Young people are very certain of their viewpoint and don't have
Mm-hmm.
patience for anyone who doesn't like instantly get
Yeah.
what she's
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's not a safe space for me. I get in trouble
Yeah.
constantly. But it's good though. To her, she's
Yeah.
challenging, and she really is passionate about it. So
Yes.
I did a poll on LinkedIn recently to find out what fee percentage recruiters charge, and it confirmed what I'd learned from speaking with so many recruiters every day. The majority of recruiters are undervaluing their service and cutting their fees to become more competitive. Listen, if you want to protect your cash flow and build reserves to protect your business against whatever might happen in the future, you need to be earning more for each placement, not less. The challenge, of course, is how to increase your fees and still be competitive. iIntro has helped hundreds of recruiters to make small but critical adjustments to the way they pitch and win business, so they can win more clients who are also willing to pay higher fees. For example, one of their clients typically earned £5,000 per placement, but just a few weeks after working with iIntro, she won a new piece of business on a retainer, so in other words, she got a deposit, and her fee was an incredible £20,000, 4 times her average. If you'd like to see how iIntro can help you to grow your recruitment business and increase your average fees, just go to recruitmentcoach.com/retained and book a free consultation. There's no obligation, and if you mention that you're a listener of the Resilient Recruiter podcast, iIntro have pledged to offer you a 25% discount off any of their services. Just go to recruitmentcoach.com/retained to get started.
Yes.
So, okay, so you've got this business. Now, I'd like to relate it specifically to my audience, which is recruiters, particularly agency recruiters. So, search firms, staffing agencies, as opposed to corporate or, recruiters and talent acquisition folks. What do recruiters need to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to be change makers and be part of this movement?
Yeah, definitely. Do you know something? I would say, first and foremost, the advantages of a diverse workforce, okay? And then I will also say, okay, back to basics. Let's strip it back to basics. Those initial, let's start at the beginning, okay? Let's start with bias. Let's start with privilege and white privilege. Let's start with microaggressions, okay? I think it really is important. And then let's move on to terminology, because there's no point jumping into complexity, like, oh, how do we recruit diverse talent if you don't understand the basics? So I always say to people, let's get back to basics, okay? And also, another thing I like to do is the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we having this conversation now? Why is this conversation important to your agency, to your consultancy? Okay, what do you want to achieve? And how do you think you're going to achieve it? So let's just have that listening session. Let's go back to basics, because I think there's no point us, putting together this amazing strategy if you're still questioning the basics, if you don't understand the basics. So for example, Mark, if I had to say to you, Mark, you have white privilege, and then you say to me, Chikere, I don't have white privilege. I struggled. I this, I that. That tells me, Mark, that you don't understand the basics, okay? If I say to you, Mark, do you understand what a microaggression is? And you say, no. So we can't really create change if we don't know the basics. So let's just get back to the basics, okay? Let's do that whole education and awareness, and let me take you on a journey. As I said to you, it's a journey that never ends. So let's take our time to create change. Because I think the problem is, like, for example, I was speaking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about blind CVs, okay? And I'm not a fan of blind CVs, because what happens to someone like myself with a name like my name, after I get through one section, you still have to see me at some point, haven't you? Okay, so those biases are still there. So let's get back to basics. Let's have this discussion. Let's see what we can do.
I want to come back to the blind CV thing, because I think that's an interesting topic in itself. But okay, this is great, because there is an increasing demand from especially larger organizations to have a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And therefore, of course, recruitment agencies respond to that by thinking, okay, well, what's our strategy? How are we going to achieve that? In order to win that business, we need to be up on this stuff. We need to have a strategy. And what you're saying, actually, we need to start much more with fundamentals than that before you can actually have any kind of offering for clients. You need to really educate yourself first and understand the basics. Let's start with that. Am I understanding correctly?
Definitely. Because you know something, Mark, there's a lot of performative action. And as you've actually said, there's a lot of diversity talk at the moment, okay? So since the pandemic and George Floyd's murder, we've been having this diversity talk. And in particular about race, because race was something nobody felt comfortable. So I think we have to be careful with the whole performative talk. We have to be careful with doing something for showpersonship, for showmanship, for showwomanship.
Yes.
We have to be careful for doing it because everyone else is doing it. So let's just scramble.
Right.
Let's try and do something. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have got to be very, very careful about performative action. And that's what I mean by saying performative action. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we need to get back to basics.
Okay, that I understand that. And you're right. It's a kind of, we don't want to get left behind, so we better have something to say on this topic. And so maybe it's thinking about it the wrong way around. Why do you think race has been such a touchy subject that people are uncomfortable talking about?
Do you know something? I often wondered that, okay? I just think, especially in the United Kingdom, we don't really talk about race. We're not as vocal as maybe North Americans are, okay? We don't feel comfortable talking about race because I think a lot of people think, if I talk about race, that means I'm not racist. And that's why we get those kind of people saying, I don't see color, I'm colorblind. There's only one race, the human race, things like that. And I think the problem with that is we are just not comfortable. And if we look at the history of the United Kingdom, think of it. Think of the transatlantic slave trade and everything else.
Yes.
We are not taught that in schools, Mark.
Yeah, true.
We're not taught about it. And even recently, my son, he was studying, he does humanities. So he did GCSE history and A-level history, and he still wasn't taught about the transatlantic slave trade. And I think it really is important. So I think the problem is, number one, we don't know our history, and in particular the history of this country. And we don't like to talk about race because we think we are all, we are not racist, okay? When as we can see, there's an awful lot of racism in this country. Look at what's happened in football.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the problem is...
Do you want to explain that just for people who are not... I've got quite a few listeners in the States, for example, who maybe don't follow football. Could you just explain what has happened recently with that?
Yes, definitely. So there was a big tournament in in Europe, actually. It was the Euros 2020, okay? And we had it this year because of the pandemic. And the England football team are so diverse. They are a phenomenal group of individuals led by a great manager, okay? And they're full of black and brown and white footballers. And they have done they did extremely well. They got to the finals against Italy. And after full time, I think the score was 1-1. And obviously we needed the winner. So they played extra time. I can't remember if it was 30 minutes or 45 minutes. But anyway, it went to penalties. And some of the players who took the penalties were black, 3 black players, and they missed the penalties. And it was disastrous. It was absolutely awful. And they were vilified. They were racially abused. And it was absolutely horrendous. Okay?
I remember.
For me, Mark, do you remember that? Mm-hmm. I remember feeling distraught.
Yeah.
And you know something, Mark? Even when I talk about it now, I still feel really, really distraught. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem was that they did so well. They got to the finals. This was the first time in how many years did they get to a final? Okay. And they were vilified. So they were racially abused in the papers, on social media, you name it. And one of the players, his name is Marcus Rashford. Yeah. There's an amazing mural in his hometown of Manchester, and that was defaced. But you know something? What was so amazing about that situation was the way the community came together and put these little stickers on them, on the mural, covering the horrendous racist abuse that he got. And for me, Mark, that was a showing of allyship, because we saw the community come together. It wasn't just black and brown people. It was white people. It was everybody coming together. So, I mean, that makes me happy when I see things like that, because I know that there are more people in the United Kingdom who want change to happen and who are not racist. But I still think there's a long way to go. And I think we need to openly have a discussion about race. I've had people saying to me before, Mark, I can't call you a black woman because black is a derogatory bad word. So if we can't even, in terms of terminology, if we don't understand terminology, and if you can't call me a black woman, you have got a long way to go. And that's what I'm trying to say. Let's go back to basics before we start putting up all these big strategies about recruiting.
Yes.
We need to start at the beginning. And that's why I said to you, Mark, that self-education is really, really important, okay? So the word person of colour and the word black, we can use it, because I use them both, okay? I think the problem with the word black, there's still people who feel very uncomfortable using that word. But also the word person of colour, okay, think of all the people it captures. It captures anyone who is not white,
right?
Okay? So when we talk about person of colour, it captures obviously black people and brown people and Asian, basically anybody who is not white. But the word black captures somebody like myself who is black. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, we can use both words, but I think we just need to understand, those words. And you know something, Mark, I just want to put it out there, calling somebody black is not a derogatory term at all, because I am black. That is that's who I am. So, Mark, as you said, you grew up with the word black, but a lot of people didn't.
Great. Awesome. So if we're getting back to basics then, Chikere, where do we start?
We start with self-education, okay? We need to have discussions also, as I said to you, in a safe space. Organizations need to have safe spaces, whether they're facilitated by external facilitator or internally, but they need to be able to have these discussions in a safe space and a brave space as well, okay? So how do your employees of color feel? What are their experiences? Okay, how do your white employees feel? What are their experiences? What are they afraid of? Okay, so we need to be able to have these discussions first and foremost. And as I said to you, that self-education is important. It's up to you to put the work in, okay? It's up to you. You need to get yourself educated. You need to get yourself reading. You need to start listening to podcasts, and when you start watching documentaries and films, it's up to you to put the word in. Being an ally is a verb. It's a doing word, okay? So the onus is just not on the people of color. The onus is on white people as well to educate themselves. It really is important, and it's important that we can have these discussions respectfully in a safe space.
Okay, excellent. I love the idea of taking personal responsibility and ownership because that really pertains to everything in life. That is a requirement of being a successful individual. And so, education, but then in terms of having the discussion, like, is this a discussion that should happen in the workplace, or is it outside? Like, what is the appropriate forum for that discussion to take place?
I definitely think it should happen in the workplace. If organizations are pushing the agenda, okay, and we've seen that everybody's pushing the agenda, and that's why I said to you, Mark, we've got to be careful that this is not just performative. This is just not talk because everyone else is doing it. So as an organization, if you're pushing that agenda, you need to have these discussions, okay?
All right.
And you need to be able to facilitate these discussions. And that's the key thing, okay? So I think definitely organizations need to drive that.
Okay, fantastic. What are the questions that we should be asking ourselves in order to move forward here?
I always say the why.
Yeah.
Mark, why are we having this conversation? Why are we talking about it now? Why is it important? What do we need to achieve? What do we need to do? So just very, very simple. The why, the what, and then the how. How are we going to do it? Just simple.
Cool.
And even if it takes us a couple of conversations, and it probably will do, because as you can imagine at first, when I do these when I facilitate these conversations, they're very quiet.
Okay, really? Is that right?
They are very... So if I say Mark, I would say, why are we having this conversation? Why is this conversation important to you as an organization? Mark, it's just so quiet. Everyone's like head down, looking around. No one knows what to say. And then I remind everyone, this is a safe space. This is a brave space. And then, people start to talk. But at first, it is very quiet. And that's why sometimes we need 2 or 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because nobody knows what to say.
Do you know what, though? That may not... I'm sure it's partially the topic, but also when I run workshops, I find if I just ask a question of the group then you have certain dominant characters who like to talk, who share, but a lot of people are quiet. So what I've found is if I tell people either in advance to say, okay, I want you to come to this meeting with having thought about this topic and with ideas to contribute, then and they feel more prepared, then sometimes that opens things up a bit. So, okay. So that makes sense. Why, what, and then how. So that's great. And what are those basics that people, well, first of all, when you ask that question, why, and they finally get talking, what are some of the answers that, what are people saying to that?
Goodness gracious, because it's the right thing to do. Okay. What do you mean by it's the right thing to do?
That was the
Because
first
we
one
need
that popped. That's the first thing that popped into my head, actually. It was, you read my mind.
Okay. He said, Mark, why is it the right thing to do?
Right.
Why wasn't it the right thing to do pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd?
Right.
Think of it, Mark. You've got to remember, and you know this, George Floyd wasn't the first black person to die in such a traumatic way.
Yeah.
So what made his death an awakening for the world? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So yes, we know it's the right thing to do, but why wasn't it the right thing to do 2 years ago, 5 years? Do you know what I mean? Why?
But
So there's lots in, it makes people think, doesn't it?
But sometimes you ask why, like you never really get, why is one of those questions where you never really get to the bottom of it, because it's a bit like, climate change. Why wasn't 20 years ago the right time but it's almost like you need a critical, I don't know if there's a right term, but a critical mass of people thinking on the same wavelength before it kind of,
Yeah, definitely. And do you know something, Mark? Sometimes I wonder if it was not for the pandemic, would we be having this discussion? Was it the fact that we were all at home and we actually saw it? I don't know. So even though the pandemic has been absolutely awful, and it still continues to be, what the pandemic has done, it has highlighted injustices in our world, in our societies, in our organizations, within our communities, and within ourselves as well.
That's true. There has been some real positives that have come out of it. What, I think so there's a sort of moral philosophical component to this conversation, but then you can also look at research showing that diverse organizations perform better and are more profitable. So then there's a commercial reason why as well. And that is probably the one that motivates business people the most is, how does this impact the performance of the business, the profitability, and so on. And so I think, like, when we're thinking about the why question, that's one that definitely needs to be talked about as well. Are there any other whys that, come up frequently?
Yes, definitely. Someone said to me recently, we never spoke about race. Race was something I was never comfortable speaking about. And I feel it really is important that we start to have this discussion. Okay. So as you were saying as well, yeah, of course, diverse companies outperform those that are not diverse. But I also think that it's more than just putting diverse candidates or diverse employees into an organization. How do we nurture them? How do we make sure that they can be their true, authentic selves? How can we make sure that when they're within an organization, they flourish? Okay? Because if you look at a lot of organizations, especially those who claim to be diverse, there's a lot of diversity at the bottom, in the middle, and then none at the top.
Right.
So how do we make sure that those diverse employees can progress up the ladder?
Totally, yeah. That's
how
true.
do we do that? So there's so much more. And this is what I say. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. This will take time. So just take your time and do things right and understand why you're doing it and why it's important.
Let me ask you because when it comes to recruiting, which is, my background, can I raise an objection that I've heard that I would love to get your perspective on? So I think there's sort of there's probably more than two camps, but there's the people who totally are advocates for whether they understand exactly why or what or how they're going to do it. They get and are in agreement with the idea that we should be striving for a more diverse shortlists and more diverse companies and so on. But then there's the counter argument that don't we just want the very best person for the most qualified person for the job? That person should get the job, and regardless of their, race or gender or, etc. What's your thoughts on that?
That's where the concept of privilege comes in. Mark, as a person of colour, if I've never had the opportunities, okay, to be the very best person because of, as we know, all the biases and systemic racism that is within our organisations, okay, how can I be the very, very best person if I was never, ever given the chance?
Yeah.
How? How is that ever going to be possible?
Yeah.
If right from day dot, I graduated from university, my white peers got on fine, they found a job, and I'm still looking. So if I was never given that opportunity, because that's another thing I hear, Mark, I hear people saying, oh, we haven't got enough diverse talent, because diverse talent was never given the opportunities. And that's the problem. That's the whole concept of privilege. That, the inequalities in our society, in our world, because diverse talent were never, ever given the opportunity. So yes, we need the best candidate, but we also need to start opening the doors. We need to start ensuring that everybody has got a chance. Okay? And the problem is we haven't got enough talent because, the talent was never nurtured. Diverse talent was never nurtured. So it's a case of, oh, I can't find any diverse talent because diverse talent was never nurtured, was never given the opportunity.
Like it's what you're describing is, as you said, if there are not, for example, C-level executives who are people of color, then and you're only looking for people with a very specific profile, then you're not going to have a diverse shortlist which perpetuates the whole thing. So that makes total sense to me. We need to, if you believe diversity is important, that equals you need to create more opportunities for diverse talent, and you need to nurture people in order to create more diversity at the top. But that's a long-term thing, and people don't think long-term. They think short-term. They think I need to hire, a CEO or a CFO or whatever. So what are some of the solutions? Because, it's not an easy problem to solve.
No, not at all. And do you know something, Mark? I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, there's no diverse talent out there. That diverse talent is out there.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah. And the thing about diversity recruitment, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. Okay. And as I said to you in the beginning, okay, I used to go out of my way to recruit diverse talent. I had my groups on LinkedIn that are still there.
That's awesome. Let's talk about that actually, because I think you've hit the nail on the head. The problem is, it takes more time and effort. You have to intentionally go to find diverse talent and not just do your usual, we need to fill this job fast, and follow your normal process. There has to be additional things that you do. And when people have targets to meet and are under deadline pressure from clients and so on, then just human nature, they take the easiest, shortest route to get there. So tell me about when you were a recruiter, because that was even before this really was a hot topic, and you just...
Before it was a thing, yeah.
And so what were some of the ways in which you went out of your way to ensure that you were introducing more diverse talent to your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So what I used to do is as I said to you, I've got a number of groups that are still very much alive on LinkedIn. So for example, I have got a Black woman in fintech group. Okay. And for example, I would create that group rather, and I engage the group. So we would have roundtable events. Okay, we would have meetings and networking and workshops. I think that's a key thing. So the more the group knew they were getting something out of it, the more they will invite their friends.
Yes.
Okay. So a tiny group of one person that tiny seed initially planted grew into like hundreds of people. Okay. So the more you engage the group, you make sure that opportunity. So I recruited very senior HR professionals. Okay. You advertise jobs on there. And one thing you've got to remember, Mark, especially now, clients want to engage with recruiters who are going all out on that whole diversity front. So surely this will make you stand apart from your competitors.
Totally. Oh, absolutely.
So, so what I would do if I was any recruiter listening, thinking, oh my goodness, where can I start? It doesn't have to be anything huge. You can just start small. Just create a group on LinkedIn. Have a look. In fact, have a look at your database and invite some of your diverse talent. So what are you going to? Are you focusing on race? Are you focusing on gender? Are you focusing on sexual orientation?
But Chikere, I think it's a genius idea, but I would feel, and for you, I understand that is a totally natural thing to do. If I started a group for Black women in fintech, I would feel fraudulent doing that because I'm not a member of that group myself. So to me, that I can totally see the value of that, but I can't see how I would personally be able to leverage that avenue to build a network. I don't know. I'm a bit stuck on that.
Well, that's the whole concept of allyship, surely.
Okay.
Isn't the whole concept of allyship is that we immerse ourselves in content from groups that are not our own?
Yeah.
We talk about an ally being in a more powerful position and an ally using their platform. So if I was a white recruiter and I wanted to recruit, more people of color, surely I would use my platform to create these groups and promote these groups. Because I think the problem, the issue we have at the moment, the people who are in positions of influence, privilege and power, a lot of those people don't look like me, Mark. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you are a person in that position, if you are an ally, and this is what I was saying, we need to get back to basics and we need to understand these simple terminologies, but that is what an ally does. Okay. And if this whole diversity, equity and inclusion means a lot and you really want to make a difference, okay, we need more people like you. To amplify voices. We need more people like you to make a difference. Okay. So as an ally, that's what I expect allies to do.
Okay. That's cool. Maybe it's getting outside your comfort zone. And
It is.
yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. So Chikere, awesome. So we've talked about going out of your way and making that extra effort to build diverse shortlists. And for a whole variety of reasons, that's a good idea. But if nothing else, that will be a differentiator for your recruitment business if you truly are not just, talking about it, but you actually have put real steps in place to, first of all, educate yourself, your team, and then to have real strategies to back that up. What else, like besides starting groups, what other avenues do you think are maybe underutilized or overlooked for recruiters to be part of this process?
Do you know something? Our databases. I remember when I was a recruiter, how many passive candidates did we have in our database? Our brand, I think there's so many ways we can do that. Surely we can get candidates to see the journey we're on. This is what we're doing. We're not going to profess that we know it all, but this is where we're starting. Okay. So I'll definitely say our database, the company we work for, our brand. Okay. Maybe having discussions with a great client, partnering up with that client. What is that client doing? So there's so much we can do. So I would really say, don't overcomplicate it. Basic, just start slowly and take things that way. And don't forget to educate yourself, because the more you educate yourself, the more equipped you will be in having these conversations.
Makes sense. Let's go back to the blind CV idea, because I think I was surprised that you didn't like that idea, because I thought the purpose behind it was to remove unconscious bias from not overt. Like, obviously, if the person who's interviewing is racist, then it's not going to help you, because when you get through to the interview round, then they might disqualify you at that stage. But what is, I think, the intention behind it is for someone who wants a diverse workforce and may have even unconscious bias, then maybe taking the name Chikere Igbokwe off the resume does help, because it gets her to the next round. I don't know what that was. That was my understanding of it. What do you think?
So what happens when you get through to the next round? We know that there's bias all through the recruitment process. And if there's bias at that initial step, that you've got to take my name off. So fair enough, I've been shortlisted. Okay, so what is the next process? The next process, you've got to see me. And what do? You see a black female. Okay, so I feel, Mark, if there's bias that you have got to take my name, okay, off, what happens in the next process and the process after that? And that's why I'm not very keen. I'm not keen.
I hear what
I'm
you're
not
saying,
keen on it at all.
But I just wonder if it's better. It's not a perfect solution, of course. But
No,
then,
it's not, of
can
course.
you ever complete remove bias?
No, you
from
can't, because we're humans.
Exactly.
Nope.
So, but does
And
it?
we all have bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, now I don't know, Malcolm. Have you read Malcolm Gladwell? He's one of my favorite authors. He's written a lot of really interesting books. But he talked about a study, and I heard subsequently that this study has been debunked, but it was quite compelling about the number of male professional musicians in world-class orchestras is predominantly men traditionally, even though in general people playing instruments is quite balanced. Men and women are all performing at a high level as musicians, but for some reason the top orchestras tend to be male dominated. And they started allowing people to audition behind a screen, so that but of course the people who are selecting the musicians said, absolutely not. We're not, sexist. We're just looking for the best players. But they kept choosing men. But then when they were auditioning behind a screen, more and more women started getting a place in the orchestra, which just shows how powerful these biases can be. So I don't think we can ever really get rid of that. But so if the blind CV is not a solution, is there any other things that companies and recruiters should be doing in order to combat this?
I just think, we all need to be aware of our biases, okay? And we need to understand that biases exist, because I always say that we all have bias. I have bias, you have bias. We're humans, we're not robots. But I think, if you think of the types of bias that are rife in recruitment, it's affinity bias, really, isn't it? It's recruiting people who are like us, who look like us, who went to the same university, possibly, who comes from the same area. So that's why you find, I remember when I used to recruit, and sometimes you get a client, when you get feedback from an interview, and the client would say, not the right cultural fit. What does that mean?
Right.
What is the right, do you see what I mean, Mark? What does that mean exactly? That person's not the right cultural fit. Does that mean that person will not get on with the existing team? Because the existing team is full of everyone who are the same. Okay. So I think the more we have these conversations, okay, the more we are all aware of our own biases and work on our biases, okay, the more we can hopefully, okay, interview, shortlist, recruit people from not our own groups, be it colour, be it gender, be it sexual orientation. But I think there's a long way to go. And something, Mark, I think you're right, blind CVs is a start. But as I said, I'm not a great fan, because what happens the next step, as we know, you see me. So what happens to the bias there? And I guess another way is putting on more diverse interview panels. Yeah. That could be another way of getting rid of the bias. But I just think we have a long way to go. But the fact that we're having this conversation is great.
Totally.
because
Yeah,
that means we want change to happen, don't we?
absolutely.
You know?
Chikere, this has been a really fun conversation. You have an infectious personality that's like you just exude energy, which I love.
Thank you.
What if people would like to learn more about your work? Where's the best website for them to visit?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, so I've got two websites you can have a look at. So it's the Allyship website, www.allyship.co.uk. But you can also have a look at my inclusive website. And inclusive is spelled with a C. Okay, just to confuse, there's two C's rather than an S at the end of the C, inclusive.co.uk, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. You know, I'm always ready to have a discussion as well. I'm very open. I think the more people we have out there, more allies, the more change can happen. So yeah, please do reach out to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chikere, and fun talking to you again, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you for having me.